2019 has been a very busy year in the world of mountain bike group sets. In terms of SRAM, we've got the new AXS stuff. You get XX1 and X01. And this is interesting because, well, it's 12 speed, obviously. It's also fully electronic and wireless. In terms of Shimano, well, actually last year they announced their new XTR group set. It's 12 speed as well. It became available just before they announced the new XT and SLX 12 speed group sets. So in 2019, there were effectively 3 new Shimano group sets, all with 12 speed. So we decided to bring the 2 flagship group sets from each company here to the Forest of Dean and ride them back to back to see which is best. Now, the XTR 12-speed group set here with the 10 to 51 tooth cassette, there are a number of different options though. 11 speed and 12 speed from XTR. We'll put all the information you need on those stories in the description. And here we have SRAM's X01 AXS Eagle group set. So they also have the XX1, but the X01 is a bit more of a trail bike group set. So we picked this one because it's slightly better matched to the wider range cassette on the back of this one. Now the basics of the 2 group sets are relatively similar. We've got a high-end aluminium crank from XTR, this one with a 32 tooth ring, and the 10 to 51 tooth cassette driven by a brand new rear derailleur. This one, again, 30 tooth ring, 10 to 50 tooth Eagle cassette with their obviously wireless AXS rear derailleur. So we are trying to compare, where possible, apples with apples. Now, pricing wise, these are flagship group sets, so they're not cheap. However, Shimano, this comes in at roughly £1,850, and the X01 Eagle AXS comes in at about £1,900. So there's a roughly £50 difference in RRPs, which might not be what you pay in the shops. Also, bear in mind that there are various different options with the group set, so that's more of a representative price rather than a definitive, this is how much it costs. Now I'm going to do a very quick comparison of some of the key component weight differences. So the SRAM cassette, that comes in at 356 grams. The Shimano one with a slightly bigger range comes in at 370 grams, so only about a 14 gram difference there. Next up are the cranks. Now SRAMs come in at 475 grams. That's a 175mm crank, carbon with the 32 tooth ring. The Shimano, that comes in at 530 grams, again 175 with a 32 tooth ring. Next up are the derailleurs. So SRAM's electronic one, obviously it's got the battery, it's got all the motors in there as well. That comes in at 388 grams, and that's a fair bit heavier than the 244 gram XTR rear mech. The final component that you're going to be wondering about are the shifters. The SRAM one comes in at 87 grams, which is really very little. Whereas the Shimano, that comes in at 187 grams. But don't forget that also includes the cable and the outer that we've included in that weight. So that's where some of the difference is coming from there. But as we talked about a little bit earlier on, the overall weights for the group sets are very, very similar. These 2 behind me, they come in at 2 grams difference, with the Shimano coming in that tiny little bit heavier. So the other bit of news, I guess, when Shimano's 12-speed was announced was that they'd got rid of their old freehub body standard because the 10-tooth sprocket just doesn't work with that. They didn't use XD, and I think that's perfectly understandable. It's kind of like Ford asking VW for an engine for their cars. It's just never going to happen. So microspline is here. It's a new freehub body standard, and it is less available than XD across the market. However, the likes of Mavic, DT Swiss do have that freehub. So if you're buying a new Shimano 12-speed group set, whether it's SLX, XT or XTR, make sure you've got a compatible wheel set, or you've got the budget to buy a new rear wheel at the very least. In terms of reliability, at this point it's almost impossible to say which is going to be more or less reliable. Shimano haven't brought any particularly new technology to the XTR, so I guess there's a lot of time and experience in building these mechanical group sets. That's not to say though that SRAM haven't built a reliable group set with AXS Eagle either. It is newer, it is less field tested, but please don't misconstrue what I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's going to be unreliable at all. The only thing that obviously you have to think about with the SRAM AXS is to make sure that your batteries are charged, because with use, and it's a fair bit of use, they will run out of batteries, but they're quick and easy to charge. So is that a reliability thing? I think not. That's more of a head reliability thing. Just remember to charge it. I could sort of witter on about all the different details of these group sets to you, whether it's the adjustments available on the shifter or the double clutch design of the rear mech here. But we have done first look and first ride videos on both of these group sets, so look in the description for links to those videos for all the real nerdy tech details. What's more important, I think, is how it feels out on the trail, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Discerning the difference between XTR and X01, well, there's some quite noticeable ones, mostly down to the way the shifter feels, because they're obviously very different ways of shifting. If we're talking about sort of the feel through the pedals and how the bikes shift up and down the cassette, they're actually kind of converging a little bit. SRAM traditionally, I guess, had a slightly more positive feel from gear to gear, from sprocket to sprocket, not clunky, but quite an obvious shift. And the previous generation XTR I found was very, very smooth, almost too smooth, in that sometimes you're sort of wondering whether you'd shifted or not. These two group sets have, I feel, kind of converged into the middle. The new XTR has a more positive feel from sprocket to sprocket. Again, it's not a jumpy, clanky shift, but when you change gear, you definitely can feel that you've changed gear. And I particularly like that. They've worked very hard on the tooth profiles, both for shifting up and down the block. Previously, when you were shifting into an easy gear under power, it was smooth, but the chain sort of dropped down onto a smaller sprocket. They've worked on this Hyperglide 2, which is to do with the teeth profiling on the cassette and on the chain as well. And so shifting under power into a harder gear is also incredibly smooth now. It's very difficult to get the shifting to sort of trip over itself. So the feeling with the SRAM shifting, again, is, I would say, almost a little bit smoother feeling than previous generations in some way. They haven't done anything to the cassette, they haven't really done anything to the chain either, so I don't think the actual physical movement of the chain to sprocket has changed particularly, but it's more that because the derailleur is shifting for you, as opposed to you pushing the cable, means that you have more isolation in terms of your bodily senses to the shifting than before. You press the button on the shifter and it shifts instantaneous. It is incredibly quick, and I think that probably helps that general sense of a smoother shifting bike. What it also means is that when you're shifting under power, it's the motor that's effectively putting in the effort to push the chain over. So you're not pushing a stiff feeling lever. You don't get the feeling of the mech being sort of wobbled and pushed and stressed through the cable into the shifter. This means that it feels very smooth regardless of whether you've got power going through the pedals or not. It's a sublime feeling shift. Now, when Shimano came to market with their 12-speed group sets, I guess some of the biggest news was that the range of the cassette trumps that of SRAM's. SRAM is 10 to 52, so a 500% range. Shimano went 10 to 51, a 510% range. On the Shimano, the jump from the 11th to the 12th gear is 6 teeth. It goes from 45 to 51. On SRAM, it goes from 42 to 50, so that's an 8-tooth jump. And kind of what it means is that when you're shifting into those easy gears on the Shimano group set, it feels like a better continuation in that change of cadence, rather than having a kind of a bailout gear, which sometimes I feel that 50-tooth sprocket has with SRAM. Now, as you'd expect on rough, chunky, rocky terrain, the chain does get banged around quite a lot, but I'm happy to say that neither with this XTR group set or this X01 Eagle AXS group set, we've had any chain retention issues. SRAM were first to play with the whole narrow, wide chain ring and a clutch. Shimano came in and, they've gone one by only as well, so this is narrow, wide of their own sort of tooth profile. A very good clutch, which is adjustable again on the XTR mech, and I've had no issues. Now, this bike does have a chain guide on there, but that's more just for peace of mind and also because it kind of came with it and I think it looks cool, so that's why it's on there. Previous generations of XT and XTR did have some issues when you back pedaled, especially when your chain was in some of the lower gears, but thus far I've not had any problems with that on this generation of XTR. I guess one of the most noticeable differences between the two group sets is the shifter, because that's the thing that really you have the most interaction with. Shimano's shifters have always been pretty good, and I've always felt that the XT and XTR level shifters have been the best on the market. The feel through them is smooth, it's positive, there's very little play in the levers, and the thing I particularly like is the upshift, so the release mechanism. You can double shift and you can flick it backwards, and I've always liked the way that the XTR and the XT shifters have performed. If anything, I think it is the highlight of the group sets. This doesn't change with this generation XTR. The lever paddles are nicely shaped, so they've got a good feel through them, and there's a little rubber thing on the thumb paddle to help you give plenty of grip. You can run it with ice spec, so you can get it nice and clean on the bar too. I've not done that with this, but you can do that. All in all, it's just a continuation and slight refinement on what we've always come to expect from Shimano. From a mechanical point of view, I think it is the pinnacle of shifting. SRAM, on the other hand, they've obviously had to go slightly different because it's an electronic group set, it's wireless, so they could almost play around a little bit more. The feel of Shimano is dictated by having a cable, so you've got to pull the cable through the housing or release it, so there's obviously going to be a more tactile, mechanical feel to it. Whereas with SRAM, well, that's just a button that you're pressing. The shifter is quite smart. It's got this little L-shaped or kinked sort of paddle that you push, and depending on which way you push it, either forwards or upwards, you get a different feel and a different shift through the back. This bike is set up so when you push it, you go into an easy gear to mimic a little bit, I guess, the thumb shifter on the XTR, and to go into a harder gear or to effectively release the tension in the mech, you click upwards. Now the click up and the click forwards have slightly different feels. So the click forward has a bit more feedback, it's a bit more tactile. The release is very, very light. If you're jumping between two systems, mechanical and electronic, I've found that very light release, I'm prone to overshifting or shifting not quite when I expected or kind of wanted to, if that makes sense. It's not that I'm shifting by mistake, it's just that the shift kind of happens before you realize you've clicked it. The caveat to that though is that the adjustability on the shifter is pretty wide, so you could manage that a little bit better by adjusting the position of the shifter. The other thing that SRAM say is that if you get something like Sugru, you could adjust the shape of the paddle should you wish. Now the SRAM shifter also has another button on the back, so you can use your index finger. That's something that apparently Nino Schurter is a big fan of. Now the other benefit of the shifter is that you can adjust what the paddles do, how they do it, how fast they do it, and how many shifts they do at a time if you hold it down, and that's through SRAM's app, which is very easy to use. So it's a very adaptable, very customizable system. So it's quite difficult to come to a conclusion as to what's best in some ways. They're very, very similarly weighted. They're very, very similarly priced as well. And the performance, at least through the pedals, in terms of their shifting up and down the cassette, again, is very similar. So the biggest difference, I guess, comes down to the livability issues and the feel of the shifter. I'm not a big fan of working on bikes, and setting up the internal routing on this particular bike was quite a pain. So the thought of getting rid of cables really, really appeals to me. However, personally, the feel of the shifter on XTR, I really like it, and the shifting up and down the block under power is excellent. The inability to run out of batteries, or the ease at which you could very quickly put a cheaper rear derailleur in there if you had an issue, I think that's a benefit for Shimano. On the other hand, SRAM have done an incredible job with their AXS Eagle group set. If you want fuss-free, consistent shifting regardless of the conditions, having a button and a motor doing the work makes absolute sense. If you're someone who's a bit of a mechanicophobe, who doesn't like working on their bikes, this is literally plug and play. Also, if you're the kind of person who likes to fiddle around and customize things so it's just right for you, the customization options with AXS Eagle is brilliant. If it was me, and I guess this is the ultimate question, what would I do? I'm going to put a little swerve ball in there. I'd buy a Shimano SLX group set with a Shimano XT shifter and save yourself a packet, get 99.9% of the performance benefits of that, and save a ton of cash over that. So that's what I would do, and I do apologise for not being very committal on whether I get XTR or X01 Eagle AXS. Anyway, if you are committed to having the top end group set from one of these two manufacturers, which one is it that you would get? Are you going to stick with the tried and tested mechanical group sets, or are you going to trust that SRAM have done a great job, as it seems they have, with their wireless stuff? Let me know in the comments, and I'm sure you will, because this seems to be quite a hot topic at the moment. In the meantime, don't forget to like and subscribe, and click the little bell just below this video to make sure you get notifications of all our new videos from BikeRadar.